The Watcher of All. Chapter 1, The First Fire. I have always been here. Not in this room, or on this hill, or even in this body, but in time. While everything around me has shifted and fractured and folded back into itself, I have remained unchanged. A soft, steady thread through a cloth that is constantly being rewoven. My first memory is of fire. Not the kind that crackles in a hearth, but something older, quieter. It was the shimmer of warmth in a darkened cave, the cautious glow of a flame lit by trembling hands. A group huddled around it, their eyes wide not just with awe, but with the fresh discovery of something that could push back the long shadow of night. I remember sitting quietly near the edge, my hands not yet wrinkled by centuries, my skin not yet calloused by the weight of years. I was not one of them, not really. They spoke in sounds that would later evolve into words, gestures that would become customs. I watched. I learned. But I did not age. They came to call me many names. The first ones did not know how to name me at all. They merely nodded in my direction with quiet reverence, as if they sensed I was stitched from something different. And maybe I was. I never felt apart from them, but always slightly aside. Like a shadow that does not quite follow the shape of the thing it belongs to. In time, they moved on. One by one. Some to illness, others to the jagged teeth of life. I stayed. The cave emptied, then filled again with a new people, ones who painted stories on the walls. They had colors and songs and the beginnings of myth. I was among them, never their leader, never their kin, but always present. They wondered why I did not change. They asked questions in their own ways. I smiled and listened and gave no answers. I had none to give. When the river that nourished them shifted its course, they followed it. I did not. I sat in the cave, alone for a time, listening to the hum of wind and stone, to the memory of their laughter echoing faintly through the years. It was not sadness I felt, nor loneliness. It was stillness. Like a note held gently in the air, neither rising nor falling, simply being. Eventually, the world changed again. The hills grew softer, green spreading like slow fire. I walked through forests untouched by axes, where the trees whispered their own kind of language. Animals came and went, as curious of me as I was of them. I did not hunt. I did not flee. I simply watched. I became part of the landscape. An odd figure seen from afar, spoken of in quiet stories. Some called me a spirit. Others thought I was a curse or a promise. The first village I saw built from stone rather than branches filled me with wonder. Not because of the architecture, which was simple and rough, but because of what it meant. These people were not just surviving, they were remembering. Marking time. Naming the days. I found myself smiling more often, walking among them during moonlight hours when no one stirred. I watched fathers teach sons to shape flint, mothers braid herbs into cord. I watched lovers exchange soft glances, watched old men carve strange symbols into the stones beside their homes. Years passed. Generations blurred into one another like smoke rising from 1,000 fires. And me? I remained. Not untouched by time, for I carry its weight in a different way, but unchanged in form. My hair darkened, then faded. My hands grew thick with use, then softened again. I could choose, somehow, how I moved through time's touch. Not resisting it, not commanding it, but drifting along its edges like leaves on a river. At some point, I stopped speaking. Not because I could not, but because the words of each new age fell from my tongue too strangely. I feared my voice would be the one thing that would reveal me. Instead, I became a silent witness. One morning, I watched a child carve his name into a wooden plank. He smiled with such satisfaction at this act of permanence, though I knew the wood would rot, the letters fade. But it was enough, for him. That moment, held fast. And so I began to write, too, not words, but images. Shapes in the sand. Patterns in stone. I etched a spiral onto the bark of a tall pine and watched as it grew thicker with years. The spiral disappeared into the folds of bark, but I knew it was there. I walked with seasons. Spring sang in green bursts through the trees. Summer painted the air with warmth and the buzz of bees. Autumn dropped gold from the skies, and winter wrapped the world in hush. I never tired of their rhythm. Even now, so many centuries later, their steps still guide mine. One year, a traveler passed me on a narrow mountain path. He looked up, startled, then smiled. "I feel like I've seen you before," he said. I nodded. "Do you live around here?" "Sort of," I whispered, my voice unused and brittle. He laughed and kept walking. That was the last time I spoke aloud in many decades. Now, I live in a quiet house at the edge of a forgotten forest. No one visits, and I do not call for them. I have found joy in simple things, the rustle of leaves, the scent of rain on dry soil, the way twilight stretches time until it feels like forever. I have watched empires rise and vanish like mist. I have seen language shift and music change its tune. I have watched people chase eternity in 1,000 different ways, all the while carrying it quietly within myself. But I do not seek to change the world. I only observe it. And though I walk alone, I carry every voice, every face, every laugh I've ever seen within me. I am not lonely. I am simply, still here. Chapter 2, The Garden of Forgotten Names. There is a garden I tend. It isn't mine, not really. I found it by accident, long ago, though "long ago" is a phrase that grows less precise with each century. Perhaps it would be better to say, I once walked through a valley where the hills curved like sleeping animals, and the wind smelled like wet stone. In that valley, tucked beneath the arms of 2 leaning trees, I found it. The garden had no fence, no gate, and no clear beginning. Flowers grew without rose or symmetry, as though they had spilled from someone's thoughts. Some were bright and wild, others pale like smoke. And among them, tiny wooden markers, each carved with a single word. Not names I recognized, not in the way we think of names. They weren't labeled John, or Aiko, or Elena. Instead, they read like whispers. Warmth. Quiet light. Her song. Before. I knelt beside one, brushing off moss with careful fingers. The letters were delicate, worn, but still there. I sat in the garden until the sky turned amber, then violet, then charcoal. The flowers swayed without breeze, and the stars blinked slowly into place above me. I didn't want to leave. So I stayed. Each morning, I wandered through the blooms, not touching anything, only watching. And I realized something curious. New markers appeared from time to time. Just one or two at a time. Always simple, always etched by hand. And the flowers closest to each new marker, they seemed to lean toward it, as if remembering too. I began to understand, this was a place where memories came to rest. Not mine. Not entirely. They were fragments, lost or left behind by those who'd forgotten them, or perhaps those who no longer needed them. Maybe a woman had once hummed a lullaby to her child every night, and now that child had grown, and the tune had vanished from her lips. Maybe that melody had floated here. Her song. Maybe someone had once held their lover's hand as the first snow fell, and the shape of that feeling had gently made its way to this soil. Before. I walked carefully, never stepping too close to the markers. It felt like stepping on footprints still warm. One day, I found a blank plank resting at the edge of the garden, along with a small knife. The wood was soft. The blade was sharp. It took me many hours to decide. And when I did, I carved just one word: stillness. I placed it gently in the earth beneath a tree whose leaves were silver on one side and green on the other. The tree seemed to shiver once, as if it understood. I did not add another marker for many years. But I came often, watching as time moved gently through the garden. Petals fell and grew again. Colors shifted, scents faded and returned. The wooden markers aged, cracked, darkened. Still, they stood. Sometimes, when I walked among the blooms, I heard a soft murmur. Not words exactly, but a feeling, like the way your heart remembers a dream it can't describe. The garden hummed, quietly alive. It became a place of ritual for me. I would walk there at dawn, when the dew still held the shape of the night, and sit among the memories. Not to mourn, not even to reflect. Just to be. People came, now and then. Always by accident, it seemed. A wanderer. A child. A painter once, who sat cross-legged for 3 days and left without taking his canvas. No one ever stayed long. They would pause, walk slowly, and then leave. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they smiled. A few looked at me, eyes wide, as if they knew what I was. I would nod, and they would nod back, and that would be enough. One woman, elderly and slow-footed, touched a marker and whispered, "I remember now." She turned to me with wet eyes and said nothing else. She vanished into the trees before nightfall. The garden does not belong to me. But I have come to believe it was waiting for someone who could remember without trying to hold on. So I do. I remember for them. For all of them. One night, when the stars fell in slow ribbons and the world felt thinner somehow, I sat beneath the silver-green tree and thought of every face I'd ever seen. Every hand held, every voice heard, every fire lit. They were not stories I could tell. They were not mine to explain. But I could sit with them. Share silence with them. Let their echoes breathe beside me. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. The air was rich with old perfume, sandalwood, lilac, and something ancient and sweet. A breeze passed through the garden, stirring each flower in turn, like fingers brushing piano keys. And for the briefest moment, I felt as though I was not the only one watching. Perhaps something else, something vast and gentle, was watching me in return. I smiled. Chapter 3: The City Beneath the Lake. There is a place I visit only when the world feels too loud. It is not marked on any map. It never was. No road leads to it, and no guide could take you there. You must simply wander long enough, or perhaps gently enough, and the world will part for you. That is how I found it, or how it found me. The first time I came upon the lake, it was at dawn. The sky was barely awake, wearing its softest colors, lavender and pearl. The water stretched wide, unmoving, as though holding its breath. There were no ripples, no birdsong, no wind. Even the trees along the edge stood still, as if not to disturb what lay beneath. I remember crouching at the shore, my reflection gazing back at me. Not as I appeared that morning, but as I had once been, younger, brighter-eyed, still learning how to carry time without bending under it. The image shimmered, and then the lake showed me something else. Beneath the surface, a city slept. It was faint at first. Just the outline of towers, the curve of bridges, the whisper of light moving beneath the water. Not ruins, no, it was too whole for that. Intact, pristine, untouched by time. It looked, waiting. I returned the next day. And the day after. The city did not change, not in any way I could measure. But my understanding of it deepened. I began to see more, narrow streets winding like veins through the glassy buildings, domes that shimmered with colors not found above ground, lanterns that glowed softly even in the deepest water. And though no figures walked those streets, I felt the unmistakable presence of life. Or memory. Or both. It did not frighten me. Rather, it comforted me, this sense that somewhere, a world had chosen to dream rather than vanish. I spent many mornings sitting by the lake, saying nothing, asking nothing. The city offered no signs, no beckoning. Just its quiet being, like a song you recognize without knowing the words. One evening, Just as twilight stretched its long fingers across the hills, I reached out and touched the water. The lake accepted me. There was no splash, no resistance. Only the sensation of cool silk pulling me gently downward. I did not drown. I drifted. The water wrapped around me like a hush, deeper and deeper, until the noise of the world above became a memory. Light filtered in, not from the surface, but from below, where the city waited. My feet touched stone. I stood in a narrow street, cobbled with pearl and shadow. The buildings around me were tall and curved, like seashells grown into towers. Windows flickered with soft blue light. Vines glowed faintly along their edges, pulsing like breath. There was no sound. But I could feel presence. Not ghosts. Not quite. Remnants of thought, maybe. Impressions. As though the city had remembered what it felt like to be alive and had chosen to keep dreaming that sensation into eternity. I walked slowly. There were shops, though their doors did not open. There were stairs, though they led to nowhere. Fountains whispered without water, and gardens bloomed in stillness. Everything was perfectly preserved, not frozen, but paused. And in the heart of the city, I found a hall. Its ceiling stretched high above, painted with stars I did not recognize. They shifted when I wasn't looking. Along the walls, murals shimmered, not painted but woven with strands of light, like silk threads captured mid-motion. Each panel told a story. Not of war or conquest, but of quiet things, a child holding a bird. A river forgetting its name. Two hands reaching for one another, never quite touching. A lantern left lit in an empty window. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a sphere of water suspended in the air. It spun slowly, showing images within, glimpses of the world above. A forest in winter . A market at dusk . A woman brushing her daughter's hair beside an open window . A field of wheat rippling beneath a stormless sky. These were not memories of this place, I realized. They were mine. The city was watching me, too. It did not demand. It did not judge. It simply held my memories with me. Reflected them back, as gently as the lake had done. I sat beside the pedestal and closed my eyes. I do not know how long I stayed. Time behaves differently here, under the water. It does not press or pull. It hovers, like mist. I may have been there for hours or centuries. When I finally stood, the city shimmered with a quiet farewell. I placed my hand against the nearest wall, thanking it. Then I walked back through the streets, past windows and fountains and breathless gardens. The water welcomed me again, lifting me toward the surface with a kind of reverence. When I emerged, the moon was high, and the lake was silent once more. I have returned many times since then. Never by intention. Only when needed. Sometimes, I bring thoughts I cannot carry anymore, and the city keeps them for me. Sometimes, I bring only silence, and the city offers its own in return. It is a place that remembers without clinging, listens without answering, and dreams without ever waking. It is not a home, but it is a kind of belonging. Chapter 4: The Library That Listens. I once found a library that did not ask you to read. It was deep within a forest where the trees grew in slow spirals, their branches twisting skyward like dancers in slow motion. I had wandered for days, not seeking anything in particular, only moving, listening to the rhythm of the soil, the hush of wind through mossy bark. Then, just beyond a hill dusted with violet wildflowers, I saw it. The building looked like a cathedral built by trees themselves. Its roof was a canopy of leaves, woven so tightly that rain would not pass. The walls were not stone or brick, but massive trunks fused together, shaped by time and patience into arching doors and windows with no glass. I stepped inside. The air was thick with quiet. Not silence, no. A stillness that hummed just beneath the skin, like the breath between two words, like a page waiting to be turned. It was warm, scented with old paper and pine, a mix of memory and soil. There were no shelves. No books. Instead, the room was lined with chairs. Hundreds of them. No two alike. Some carved from driftwood, others sewn from faded fabric. A few were little more than stone slabs, worn smooth by sitting. They were all occupied. But not by people. Each chair held a memory. I could feel them before I even took a step. Emotions, stories, moments, each chair held something different, and each offered it freely, if you were willing to listen. You did not sit on the chair. You sat with it. I approached one at the edge of the room. It was low, almost child-sized, with peeling blue paint and a single cushion embroidered with stars. I knelt beside it, rested my hand on the armrest. And it began. Not with words, but with feeling. I was no longer in the library, I was beside a river, laughing. The air was summer-warm. A voice, someone I had once known, maybe, was telling a joke I couldn't quite hear. The joy of the moment pressed against me, as real as breath. And just as quickly, it faded. The chair had told me its story. I moved to another, a high-backed seat made from twisted vines, humming with quiet sorrow. This one showed me a farewell. Two people standing under falling leaves. No anger, only understanding. A goodbye spoken without sound, but not without weight. Each chair whispered a life. Not full biographies, not grand epics. Just moments. Glimpses. A smile. A promise. A pause before the rain. All held with care, as though the library understood the importance of small things. I did not rush. I wandered among the chairs for what felt like days. Some stories made me smile. Others left a tender ache behind, like the impression of a ring no longer worn. Some chairs held joy so bright it shimmered in the air. Others were heavy, but never bitter. There was no cruelty in this place. No fear. Only the truth of what had once been. And then I saw it, an empty chair. At the center of the room, beneath a skylight framed by branches, sat a simple wooden seat. Worn. Unassuming. Waiting. I hesitated. For centuries, I had been the one to watch, to listen, to gather the stories of others without offering my own. I had always believed that was my purpose, to be a quiet vessel for the world's passing moments. But the chair waited, and the light above it warmed the floor like an invitation. I sat. And for the first time in what might have been eons, I allowed myself to be heard. Not aloud. Not with words. But with presence. The library listened. It listened to the first fire, the forgotten garden, the silent city beneath the lake. It listened to the faces I'd loved, the hands I'd held, the countless dawns I'd watched unfold. It listened to my questions, never answered. My wonder, never dimmed. My solitude, never sorrowed. It listened without interruption. Without judgment. Without needing to reply. And when I finally stood, something had changed. A new chair had appeared. Simple, curved just like the one I'd sat in. Its wood still warm. A new presence settled into it, mine. Not a memory, not a ghost. Just a moment that now belonged to the library. I touched the back of the chair gently, as if saying goodbye to a part of myself. Then I turned and left. Outside, the forest continued as it always had, timeless, patient. Birds called overhead, and the leaves moved softly in the wind. But I carried something different now. Not weight, not burden. Just lightness. As though being heard had returned to me a piece I didn't know I was missing. I do not know if I will ever find the library again. But I know that if I do, it will remember me. And it will listen. Chapter 5, The Clock That Counts Only Moments. There is a village I visit once in a long while. It does not appear on any maps. I do not think it stays in the same place. Sometimes I find it nestled at the base of snowy mountains, sometimes deep within a golden field, and once, only once, it floated gently above the trees, resting on clouds. The village is small. No more than a dozen cottages, a winding path, a few scattered lanterns. But at its heart stands a tower. And within that tower, ticking quietly, is a clock unlike any I have ever known. It has no numbers. No hands. No pendulum to mark the rhythm of hours. Instead, at its center is a single gem, clear as still water, suspended in the air. Around it, rings of metal turn slowly, each etched with symbols I cannot read. They move not in time with the sun or the seasons, but with something far more delicate. They move with moments. The villagers call it the keeper. No one remembers who built it, or how. It was simply always there, they say, watching over them. They do not wind it, and yet it never stops. When I asked what it counted, an old woman smiled and said, "The things that matter." She placed a hand on her chest. "You'll understand." And I did. Not all at once. But over time, the truth of the clock revealed itself, not through mechanics, but through feeling. The first time I stood before it, I felt a soft thrum deep inside me. Not a beat, like a heart, but a gentle tug. A pull toward something that wasn't quite memory, but something near it. And then it happened. The air shimmered, barely. I saw myself, just for an instant, standing beneath a cherry tree many, many lifetimes ago. Blossoms falling like snow. A voice beside me, laughing softly. A hand brushing mine. The moment so light, so brief, I had almost forgotten it. The clock had not. It remembered. Not the year, not the season, but the feeling. The shape of the moment. That was what it counted. Not hours, not minutes. Only meaning. Each time I visited, it showed me something. Not always joyful. Sometimes, just stillness, the breath before speaking. The pause between raindrops. The gaze of someone who didn't say goodbye, but meant it anyway. I came to understand that the rings of the clock turned not with time, but with remembrance. And not mine alone. The villagers would sometimes gather around it in the early morning, holding hands in silence. They didn't speak. They didn't pray. They simply stood, letting the clock choose its next turn. And when it did, they smiled softly, as though acknowledging something that passed between them, unseen. One day, a child approached me as I sat nearby. "Are you old?" she asked. I chuckled. "Very." She looked at the tower. "Older than the clock." I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "I think the clock is older than everything." She nodded as if that made perfect sense. And perhaps it did. Because the clock did not measure life the way calendars did. It did not record battles or birthdays or endings. It remembered only presence. Intention. Connection. Moments. The kind that shaped you without leaving scars. I once asked a villager what happened when someone passed away. She pointed to a small alcove near the base of the tower. There, carved gently into the wood, were dozens of tiny notches. Each one unique in shape and spacing. "When someone goes," she said, "we don't say goodbye. We sit together and mark their moments. Then we let them belong to the clock." I stood before that wall for a long while. I recognized none of the names, but I felt them. Like faint heat from a sun long set. And I thought of my own moments, millions of them, perhaps. Most now soft and blurred. And yet, a few remained vivid, sharp as light through crystal. I wondered, had the clock counted those, too? Perhaps. Or perhaps the clock existed because such moments needed somewhere to rest. One evening, I found myself alone in the tower. The gem at the center shimmered faintly, reflecting nothing and everything. Without thinking, I whispered aloud, "Do I have a place in you?" The rings paused. Then, just once, they turned. A shimmer passed through me. No vision this time. No memory. Only warmth. A moment, shared. I did not speak again. When I left the tower, dawn was brushing the sky with quiet color. The village still slept. The trees swayed in a slow dance, as though moving to the rhythm of something just beyond hearing. I walked away without looking back. The clock would remember me, and I would carry its stillness wherever I went. Chapter 6: The Day the Stars Fell in Reverse. There are few things that truly surprise me anymore. After watching the rise and fall of oceans, the shifting of mountains, the quiet blooming and withering of countless lives, I have grown used to the rhythm of things. The way time loops and flows, the way light bends gently into memory. But there was a night, a single, perfect night, when the sky did something I had never seen before. And in that moment, even I held my breath. It began as a whisper, not in sound, but in stillness. A hush deeper than silence, like the world had paused to listen for something long forgotten. I was walking along a path of pale stones, somewhere far from places I knew. I had wandered without destination, drawn only by the cool pull of evening air. The stars had begun to emerge, soft and slow, like shy fireflies blinking into view. Then the sky shifted. Not violently. Not loudly. Just turned. At first, I thought I was mistaken. A single star seemed to hesitate, its glow dimming, brightening again, then drifting, not downward, but upward. Against gravity. Against everything I knew. Then another followed. And another. Soon, the whole sky was in motion, not falling, not ascending, but reversing, as if time itself had decided to fold inward. Stars arched gracefully, not crashing, but spiraling back toward some origin, some memory beyond sight. They moved like lanterns caught in an unseen tide. The constellations I had known, Orion, Lyra, the Southern Crown, all unraveled slowly, their shapes dissolving into liquid light. It was not chaos. It was unmaking. A gentle unwinding of something ancient and beautiful. I stood on the hill, looking upward. For the first time in what felt like ages, I was not the observer of history, but its companion. The world did not ask me to remember it. It remembered me. The air grew lighter, filled with the hush of starlight in motion. Every leaf, every blade of grass, seemed to tilt upward, as though listening, as though watching with me. And then, I felt it. A presence. Not a person, not a voice, but something vast and kind. Like the memory of being held as a child, or the warmth of sunlight on closed eyes. It wrapped around me without touching, filled me without words. It asked no questions. It offered no answers. It simply acknowledged me. And I understood. Not in words, but in feeling, that I had never been forgotten. Though I had lived beyond time, though I had walked alone through eras and echoes, something had always been walking beside me. A quiet rhythm, a soft gaze. Not guiding, not directing, only being. Like me. The stars above me pulsed gently, one final time. Then, just as softly as they had reversed, their movement stilled. The sky settled. The constellations returned, unfamiliar now, but no less beautiful. The world resumed its breath. I sat on the hill until morning. The sky brightened slowly, like tea steeping into gold. Birds began to call. Wind rustled through trees I did not know the names of. And still, I sat. I did not cry. I did not speak. But inside me, something had shifted. For the first time, I did not feel like the last witness. I felt like part of the memory itself. The stars would fall again. The clock would turn. The library would listen. The city would wait beneath the lake. The garden would bloom with forgotten names. And I, who have seen empires vanish and children become legends, would remain, not to record, but simply to be. Not eternal. Not infinite. Just, still here. For as long as moments continue to count themselves.